Welcome to Storm Tracker, your eye on the storm of your Carolina Hurricanes, and your home for the best insight and analysis to keep you totally informed on what's happening with the Canes. Whether it's the latest news on the ice or off the ice, we've got you covered. Now let's begin. Here's your host, Tom Ray.
Well, the Carolina Hurricanes have been struggling with inconsistency for an extended period, and it hasn't improved since the Canes pulled off their mega deal acquiring Mikko Rantanen and Taylor Hall. In fact, the Canes are 5-7 since that trade, being outscored 33-30. That's a little better than it sounds, because one of those games was the game the Canes won 7-3 over Utah. So, some concerning things around the Canes these days. And pundits are having a field day with the suggestions that the Canes might flip Mikko Rantanen before the deadline. Well, anyway, it's going to be interesting. The Canes have had a string of losses recently in games where they just haven't looked like themselves, and they're having a challenge getting to their game. What are we going to expect at the deadline? And what do the Canes need to do to get back to playing the way that we know is the right way for the Canes? Joining me to talk about this and a whole lot more, insiders Erin Manning and Katie Bartlett. Ladies, ready?
Ready.
Sure. Let's get to Friday.
Let's get to it. Anyway, for sure, a nice weekend for the Canes. They won over the last 4 days, 3 games in 4 days. They won 2 of them and almost won the other. I thought they played a solid game in that one as well. So that's good news. But for sure, the Canes have struggled to find their game. Erin, what are you thinking?
Well, it's kind of a topic that's come up periodically over the course of the year that, apart from that very hot start that they had, that, where we thought, oh my goodness, they brought in these new players and they just keep right on going. These are the Carolina Hurricanes. There's nothing they can't do. We all felt that. And then, 20 games in or however many games in, reality started, setting in like it usually does. Sure. Ever since then, it seems like there's been a lot of inconsistency, a lot of ups and downs, strings of wins interspersed with losses and, the highs and lows that they've gotten to. So I think what we're all looking for is we're looking for that moment when we say, okay, these are the Carolina Hurricanes, I feel like we've seen flashes of that, especially over these last 3 games, where there were moments where you started to see the bigger picture. You started to see things coming together more. But there's still some weaknesses that may, hold them back. So we'll see what happens.
Well, and I think a lot of folks have said, this struggle, this intense struggle, certainly this last number of games mirrors the new additions of Rantanen and Hall, and some of the challenges that the Canes have had kind of, I guess, getting back onto their game with these 2 guys in the lineup. I wanted to share an interesting comment from Jordan Martinook, and I thought it was very telling. And Martinook said, they've been great in the room, and that hasn't been an issue. It's obviously, I think, when you bring in different players, it's sometimes, and we've all kind of been guilty of this, like, we're bringing in Mikko and Taylor. Taylor, an MVP, and Mikko, a big point getter, that you can be like, okay, well, maybe they're going to take over, but it shouldn't impact any of our games. We need to show them what we do that's made this team successful, and then they can join in on that and bring their skill set to our foundation. And I think we haven't, as a group around them, haven't done a great enough job showing them how we play. So I thought that was interesting because we wondered as we've taken a look at the team, have they changed how they played, right? And we've talked for a little while about the Canes' challenges to get to their game, to get up into that heavy forecheck, be solid on the puck, be out shooting the other teams, be very strong on shot suppression. We haven't been seeing that. Katie?
Yeah, I definitely think that there has been a bit of forced play, that they know that Rantanen is a superstar, and so they're trying to force him the puck or wait around and see what he can do instead of doing their own thing. But like you said, I think the last 3 games, we're starting to see it round more into form of what it's going to look like. There is some transition play when the opportunity is there, but if the opportunity is not there, go ahead, get it deep, go after the puck, see if they can get possession and work from there. And we have definitely seen, especially Rantanen coming around. He is just looking so much more dangerous these last few games. He's produced a little bit more. The chemistry with him and Aho looks like it's starting to click, starting to get figured out. And so I'm very hopeful that perhaps this is more of a get to know you period, as well as building some confidence. And once those 2 things happen, then not only will the top line start to click, but it'll be like dominoes after that everything else will kind of fall into place.
Yeah. And I think one of the things we're hearing, I know you're on top of this as well, Katie, the numbers for Mikko and the metrics for him are quite strong, right?
Yep, they are. I mean, I can go through a lot of different numbers and throw them at you, but when you compare his time in Colorado to his time in Carolina, he is actually producing better metrics in shots per game. He has good face-off percentage with Carolina because he is a secondary face-off. If his center gets kicked out, he's like Jarvis. He can come in and take the face-off if necessary. Mm-hmm. His Corsi percentage for is almost 10 times higher with Carolina than it was with Colorado. The shots percentage for is about 4% higher. The expected goals, of course, Canes lead all metrics in expected goals, but that's higher with Carolina. And the high danger chances for is also higher in Carolina. The only couple things that are lower are the actual scoring itself and his shooting percentage. Once that shooting percentage starts to come up and match what it was in Colorado, he's going to go on a tear, and it's going to be pretty amazing. And finally, his PDO is worse in Carolina than it was in Colorado. So you got to eventually break it down and say, just so far he's been unlucky, and eventually going to regress to the mean, and his luck's going to improve, and we're gonna start seeing the real Mikko Rantanen show up. I mean, the real Mikko Rantanen has shown up.
He is showing up for sure
on the scorecard, and it's going to be magnificent to watch.
And Katie, absolutely. Once again, the PDO is which? It's
the shooting percentage combined with the save percentage, and that's right. Everybody. That's right. Not just his shooting percentage.
Right. I just wanted to make sure that those folks who weren't quite up to the PDO again would be aware of it.
And actually, now that I think about it, there's one final stat I looked up, which is called the individual point percentage.
Yes.
Which is if there's a goal scored on the ice, what percentage of the time is a player part of that goal, meaning got the goal or got an assist on the goal. Yeah. In Colorado, no surprise, 2/3 of the time, if there was a goal scored on the ice, Mikko Rantanen was on the score sheet for it. But in Carolina, 75%.
Wow.
So 3 out of every 4 goals that are scored for the Hurricanes when Mikko Rantanen is on the ice, he is a part of.
Yeah.
So if that continues with his shooting percentage going up and some of his teammates being able to finish chances more, they're going to be super effective.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, clearly he is finding his way. And one of the things that I think a lot of fans struggle with is, they haven't looked as closely at Mikko before as you have, Katie, and they don't really know if, is he playing better or worse? I mean, all they know is the Canes are struggling and Mikko's there and he's not getting a lot of goals and so on. But you're right. I mean, the grade A chances that were delivered in these games we just saw, between him, Aho, and either Jarvis or Svechnikov, it didn't matter. They had a number of grade A chances when they were on the ice. They could have scored a bunch of goals, frankly. So that's, one of the funny things, and you might remember this, but before your time, when I used to cheer a lot for the Hurricanes and they were not a good team, there was kind of a classic situation with the Canes. Is they get a lot of shots and a lot of grade A chances and they wouldn't score. And you would be so frustrated because they had a whole bunch of folks who just couldn't score. And I'm a little concerned that the Canes have more folks than I like that aren't scorers. I think that's something we need to talk about. And it kind of goes up and down the lineup, and it's also showing itself on the power play. I pulled out the power play numbers. I thought we'd just talk about this for a couple of minutes before we talk about the deadline. We talked about how great it was at the start of the year. It was amazing, and they just were clicking on all cylinders, as you know. 29% October, 25 in November, 23.7 in December. So all good heading into Christmas and the break. 5.1 in January, 12.5 in February, and they're sitting at 10 in March. These numbers for so long, and I know the folks in the crowd, and I was one of them watching. Every time they got a power play, we kind of, please, no. And they got a 4-minute just at the end of the game, and you're just sitting there going, oh, I just hope we don't get scored against. I mean, I know that's kind of a funny thing to feel, but the power play is so out of sync. And I'm not sure how that plays into everything, but as we take a look at this upcoming trade deadline, I think the big question from my side is, how do the Canes feel about this? Do they want to strengthen their team materially to go for a run? Do they just want to add a couple of players? Do they want to stand pat? They've made a big move. So, what are we thinking? And so it could be, it was talked about a transition year. Do they say, hey, let's just hang on. We've got Nikishin coming tomorrow. What are we going to do? Erin, why don't you kick it off?
Well, I think that most people watching the Canes and just watching what they've done so far, I mean, like you said, they've made their really big splashy move. Yeah. Is it impossible for them to make another big splashy move? Well, we all know about the cap constraints. There's some, we'll get into that in a little bit. But even, anything that they do that would be a big splashy move is going to require moving some roster players. And that gets difficult this time of year. We've seen teams that do that at the deadline. Swap out a bunch of guys that have been there all year and bring in guys that, have to learn the systems and understand everything and, find that chemistry like what Mikko Rantanen is doing right now, and he's had a head start because this trade was completed at the end of January. And so, you don't want to do that. You don't want to have, a bunch of, here's how we're going to make this happen. We're going to move a bunch of guys out and bring other people back in. So I think that I don't think it's a play it safe completely year. I don't think they're going to do absolutely nothing. There's some holes they need to fill, but I think they're going to do it responsibly, and I don't think they're going to, go for broke, so to speak.
Katie, you think they're the same?
Yeah, I'm on the same board. First of all, I'm going to go on the record. Nobody's going to be surprised. The big splashy move is not going to involve trading Mikko Rantanen.
Okay.
No, absolutely.
That's what I was kind of going to get to. Are we going to move Rantanen?
Yep.
Sincerely and firmly believe that not only is he going to stay in Carolina the rest of the season, and he is going to find out what an amazing place it is to play, and he is going to happily ink a very fat contract for what is probably most likely the rest of his career,
right?
Or at least close to the end of it. Not only do I believe that, but I actually believe that the Canes are serious about making a good, solid run. They're not going to push all their chips in this year. That's not going to happen. But they have some guys that they are playing for that are at the end of their career that they love, and they want to do what's right by them before they leave this team, and they are going to do what they can to put as good of a team on the ice as possible to get them deep into a playoff run.
Yeah.
So that's
Agreed,
not going,
100%.
Like Erin said, that's not going to be turning over 25% of the roster, because that would just kill all of the locker room cohesion that they have developed. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the moves that they make involve little to no actual roster turnover, because they want to build with what they have already created and move forward that way. And they'll be if there's somebody who can manipulate the cap, it's Eric Tulsky and his crew. So they'll get something figured out. And the Canes, as they look right now, is going to be pretty close to the way that the Canes look after the trade deadline, but a little bit more perhaps sturdy and deep if, an injury or two were to arise.
Well, look, you brought up a good point, is taking a look at the cap, and Puckpedia, of course, is the place you want to do that. they basically kind of got the Canes at about just under $500,000 in cap space right now that they see them with. Now, they have a couple of players that they do bring in new players they can move down, such as Tyson Jost or Riley Stillman. That would give them a little bit. They could put, of course, William Carrier on LTIR, which would give them a couple of million as well. So they do have a little bit to work with. We also know that Eric's very good at bringing in third teams if necessary to try to pick up cap. Mm-hmm. So if there's a deal to be made, it'll be kind of interesting. So I thought what we do is just take a look at the positions, see how it's going to go. I mean, I have a particular concern with the fourth line right now. I think it's very light in terms of a fourth line for playoff play. And I think one of the questions you have to ask yourself as you look at this lineup, are these the right players to go into battle in the playoffs? And we know that the game is quite different. It's a tougher game. It's a in-your-face game. It's not a game where you've got lots of extra room out there. And I think some of the players are going to feel it from the Canes side. And the fourth line, which is kind of a work in progress right now, I think is an area that Eric's going to want to shore up for sure. So let's start off. I wanted to kick it off. And one of the areas that I've talked about a lot, and I know it's not your popular area these days, is goaltending. I have not been as excited with the goaltending this year. I think both Anderson and Pyotr Kochetkov have been fine. They've had their nights. They've done the job, but they haven't been stealing hockey games. They haven't been lights out nights. You come away and go, man, that was unbelievable. We see that very seldom. And I'm kind of thinking that this year is maybe, or next year is maybe the kind of year where the Canes are going to have to get that kind of goaltending, because the defense, as we've seen, has a few warts as well. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But there have been rumors from time to time about the Canes going for a goaltender. And of course, the name that keeps popping up is John Gibson. I'm a huge fan of Gibson, but we don't think necessarily that John's going to be a Cane, right?
I just don't see him as a big enough upgrade in order to give up assets.
Yeah.
And again, if they were to get Gibson, I think you have to include Anderson as part of that. And I don't see them doing that to Freddie. I think they value Freddie and the time that he has put in with the Canes and the service he's provided. So like I mentioned before, I think they're wanting to do another big push this season in the playoffs for some of those veterans, and Freddie would be one of those veterans that they are wanting to play for. So if you're not trading Freddie, I mean, obviously they're not going to get rid of Kochetkov. He has so much potential and such a ceiling. So, and you're not going to carry three goalies. Gibson wants to be traded somewhere where he can be the starting goalie. So even if there was a world where they trade Freddie, Piotr's not going to be relegated to a backup who only plays when there's a back-to-back or something like that. You know, the odds start against a really weak team. He is a goalie of the future, and at the very least, he is going to be a tandem. So the fit just doesn't make sense. It's not a big enough upgrade. Now, if you want to talk about trading Freddie Anderson for Connor Hellebuck, then we'll have a conversation. But I don't think that one's happening. Yeah, Gibson is not Hellebuck, that's for sure. There's no one else available that's a big enough upgrade, and I think that they want to try to win one with Freddie before Freddie either retires or goes and finds a new team to play for.
Well, it's interesting. I was just going to mention that the one thing that Anya actually was on X and did have an interview that had been done with Pyotr. I don't know if you saw that, but he was very clear that he wants to play as much as possible.
Oh yes, absolutely. So. And I liked, Katie, the one point that you brought up that I think sometimes we don't think about. A lot of fans, myself included, you know, we have not such great memories of Freddie in last year's playoffs, you know, but he was coming out of such a difficult situation with his health issues that he had all season. And then when he came back in, you know, the goal was to get him as many reps as possible.
Yeah.
And I think what ended up happening with that, you know, when you really look at it, when you step back and try and take a really objective view, they played Freddie a lot down the stretch, which left Pyotr kind of cold. You know, he was not playing. This is prior to the playoffs. So you had Anderson playing as much as possible to get up to speed. You had Kochetkov cooling down. So that didn't lead to a good situation for that reason. You know, you had, by the time that it became clear that Freddie shouldn't be starting every game, they had been starting him every game, and it was, Kochetkov came in for one game cold and didn't do that great,
For sure.
It would be better for them to stick to their tandem approach, even in the playoffs. And I've said before that, I understand why you want to have a starting goalie in the playoffs because, you get that mental game going on, you want to frustrate the shooters on the other team and so on. But I think if your tandem works in the regular season, you should stick to it in the playoffs. And I kind of want to see the Canes do that this year. I hope that they do.
Well,
Definitely.
I go a little bit more aggressive on that too, Erin. I criticized Rod Brindamore significantly for not doing that because Freddie, frankly, he struggled in the playoffs. And there were games that I think Piotr, if he was in, might have and played regularly, he might have been able to get that done. So for sure, go with them and share it right through. Agreed. Katie, you had something to add?
No, just I think the tandem as we have it is fine, and I wouldn't be surprised if it leans a little towards Kochetkov as things go along. I think he is hungry, and he has something to prove, and he wants it. He really, really wants that net and that trust and that opportunity. So I agree. I think it'll be a tandem at least to start, but he might start. I have a feeling he has an extra gear in him that he's going to be shifting into as the season ends and going into the playoffs. And we saw the start of that last night. I think last night was a very good indicator.
You know what? It's funny you mentioned that. Yes, because I had come out recently on X and said that I was disappointed the Canes goalies are not stealing any games, and it created a bit of a stir. And I was sitting there thinking, you know what? Piotr's about to steal a game, which was good, and he ultimately he let one in, but that's right, and the other thing we know is that both Freddie and Piotr, at different times have been really hot. They've been lights out in there, and they just haven't gotten there yet this year, and I think that's something that Taylor Hall talked about recently and said, hey, at the end of the day, it's who heads into the playoffs on top of their game, who's really got the momentum going.
That's true.
All this other stuff, we can push and shove and whatever case, and we're going to try to get as high as we can for home ice advantage, of course. But really, it's which teams are firing on all cylinders as they head into the playoffs. And we've got to hope that both Freddie and Piotr stay healthy, number one, and of course get their game in gear. But an area that we do know we have concerns is our defense core. That group still has warts for sure. Brent Burns still averaging over 21 minutes a game. He's second on the Canes. Not sure how we convince anybody that he should play a little bit less. Dmitry Orlov, he's playing good most of the time, but he coughs it up regularly. He's doing it almost every game now, and I saw it again while we were watching these games. I'm not sure what's causing that. That's kind of a strange thing. We do know that next year we've got a couple of youngsters that are likely going to be in the lineup, Scott Morrow and Alexander Nikishin. But what do we do now? Heading into the playoffs, you've got this cast of six. Likely they're the six that we're going with. What do we do in case of injury? What's going to be the situation on the Canes? You want to lead it off, Erin?
Sure. I know we talked a little bit about, could the Canes make a big swing for a big name player? We put a couple of names out there. I think more likely they're going to be looking for a seventh defenseman. They're not going to want to shake up the top six. They have their top six. And it's interesting that, because you mentioned Orlov, I was watching him last night when I was watching the game on TV. And, the camera would kind of pan to him when he would make one of those gaffes, and unfortunately it happened more than once. But you can tell that this is a player. He's very frustrated with himself with these things. His whole demeanor, his whole attitude, the way he shakes his head after something like that happens, and just he looks, he's clearly feeling it, So this isn't a case of somebody that just doesn't have it anymore or is, falling apart, for some reason or other. He's not 100% on top of his game.
No.
And, we don't know exactly why, this late in the season, everybody's like what Rod would say is a little dinged up, So he could just need some time away from that, but it's hard to look at a player like that and say he's playing badly because he's not. He's battling through it, whatever he's doing. But I think probably the biggest frustration for him has probably been his inability to produce much in the way of offense, because that's always been a big part of his game. So the fact that his offense has fallen off so badly, I think is part of what's eating his confidence. But that's where I think that, Rod Brind'Amour's looking at this. He's looking at the big picture, and he's saying he expects Dmitry Orlov to return to form. And I think that within a range, that's probably going to happen. Yeah. So you're not going to go out and look for somebody to replace Orlov. The only thing that would change that would be if the Canes are looking at the fact that he's a UFA and that somebody else wants a trade involving Orlov. They're going to listen. They're not going to initiate those conversations. But anytime you have a UFA that you might be able to make a trade for and get something better in return, you're going to listen. So that I don't see that happening.
Well, that's an interesting point, because of course it's pretty well earmarked at this stage that Alexander Nikishin would take Orlov's spot. I mean, that seems to be the general consensus right now. And Nikishin may or may not get here this year. We don't know. But the reality is that if they decide to go forward with Orlov, he becomes basically a deadline rental. So that's a decision that they're going to make. But I do believe that you're right. If somebody came and offered something interesting, I think Eric would probably listen. I believe he's replaceable. I don't think he's not replaceable. The other thing, and we talked about this on the defensive core, just as an aside, we had one of the best shutdown pairs in the game last year in Shea and Pesce, for sure. Those guys, and they were together, they were outstanding. And you've moved Chatfield up. You've given Orlov significantly more minutes. It's taking its toll in my mind. This is hard work for these guys. And, I don't think either one of them they weren't necessarily as good a pair as Shea and Pesce in any case. So you're asking them to do a lot. And, they're going to have struggles. And in fact, I've been watching Chatfield, and he's certainly been feeling the pressure as well. So again, I think the D is they're probably going to go with what they have. There were talks about possibly going after a guy like Erik Karlsson. And of course they had talked about Karlsson before, but I just don't see the only way I would see him in the case is because the Canes power play is so awful that they decide that they want to get a power play quarterback that can actually, can really drive the power play for them. And they think that he could do it. And crazily enough, 2 years ago, it's that recent that he had 105 points. So here's a guy that they know he can drive offense, but I don't think that's going to happen. I'm kind of like you. So if we think they're going to add a depth defenseman, who's on the radar?
From Anaheim, I like Dumoulin. He was a Canes draft pick and won the Stanley Cup with the Penguins, and he's been around. He's, I think, 33. But he's a very defense-first kind of guy, so he's somebody that I think could stick around the team, not necessarily play a lot, slot in here and there to help rest a few guys. He's a good skater, so he at least fits in with the Canes system that way. And I just think that, if you have a seventh defenseman, you're not bringing in the flashiest player. You just want somebody who's going to be steady, be good in the locker room, bring that veteran kind of presence and gravity and that sort of thing. And he just seems like he would be a good option for the Canes in that particular area. Nothing exciting, but solid, steady, and probably could work fine with Walker or Ghost, because if he were needed, that's where he would be, as he would be on the third pair.
Yeah, and I think you're onto something with Dumoulin. He's on a team that he's being offered up. Apparently, he's available, and that's one of the things that you have to look at this year in this whole trade scenario. Is there's so many teams pushing hard to try to get in the playoffs. You can hardly get access to any players. So he's definitely one. A couple of quick things on Dumoulin. 33 years old, as you mentioned. He's 6'4" and 214. He's a big player. He's played in, serious playoff action with the Penguins, of course, and had gone there in that Jordan Staal trade. But here's a scouting report on him. I thought I'd read that just for grins, because I like Dumoulin a lot. Big mobile defenseman who can move the puck efficiently and log a lot of minutes. Has the size to play an effective shutdown game, and that's something I think the Canes would love if he got in there. and enough offensive skill to contribute occasionally at the other end of the ice. He's just a good, solid defenseman in my mind, and he'd be a guy that if you put him in there, you wouldn't be concerned about doing it. So he's definitely a guy that I think would be on the radar. Another one, you know a little bit about this guy, David Savard. Erin?
Yes, and I mean, I realize that anybody who hears that name is thinking, no, there's no way, because he has fallen off a great deal this last year. And really, I mean, I would say that this has been kind of an ongoing thing. Savard was, of course, he does have a Stanley Cup as well, though, and he's a veteran. So in a mentorship role, and that's not necessarily something that the Canes are lacking. I think he'd be a great fit for a team that needs a mentor. The only way I could see him coming to Carolina, and we've talked about this just a tiny bit, but Carolina might be looking at some of the other players that Montreal has available. We'll get to those later.
Okay.
So if this was one of those things where this is a package and you're moving pieces here and there, I could see, I mean, if you're already making a deal and you're getting a player or something, then, you might take Savard's for this last run and give him another shot at it all. But for what the Canes need, I think Dumoulin's a much better fit.
Yeah. And both of these guys, by the way, right shot. Now Savard is an interesting guy. He checks in at almost 235, so he is one solid dude back there. Oh man,
he's big.
He's and the word on him through from the elite prospect guys is he's just one hard guy to play against. I can understand it.
Yes. Even having lost a step, he's helped the Habs with their young defense core, because that's really and that's one of the other things that comes up is, would they even move him or just keep him like as an own rental through the end of the year, with the Habs still not sure whether or not they might push for a wild card spot. They may not want to move him at all, so we'll see.
Yeah, and at $3.5 million UFA this year, I think that's on the edge of what you want to pay for this. A guy that's a little bit less, and a guy that I think is an interesting option as well. Another big defenseman, we're all over the big defenseman for some reason, is Derek Forbort with the Vancouver Canucks. Now, Forbort, 6'4", 216. He's a guy that he's a first rounder. Okay, so he's a guy that has a pretty good pedigree. I like Forbort. I think he's solid. He's one of those guys, you watch him, he's kind of no nonsense. You don't see a lot of him, and that's a good thing, right? He's just doing his job out there. The good thing about Forbort, he's a $1.5 million deal and a UFA this year. So, I mean, again, you're looking at players that, you don't have a lot of money. You've got limited cap space. You want to find a player that, hey, if he's got to come in and play some minutes, he can. And he's been playing a regular shift. He's been playing a lot of minutes with Vancouver. So I think Derek Forbort is another guy that I would kind of keep on the radar a little bit as far as defensemen go. So wrapping up the D-core, feeling is they're going to go for a depth defenseman, probably going to be a lower cost guy, not going to cost a lot, later round draft pick, or depending on if they add another player. In any of these situations, they may do exactly what you said, Erin, and say, hey, we got an opportunity to pick up a couple of people here, a forward and a defenseman, that can add something to the Canes as we go forward. And in all cases, those defensemen we just talked about are all unrestricted free agents. So easy decision for the Hurricanes. Brings up an interesting question on the front side. As we start to look at center and the wing, we do have some forwards that are UFAs as well this year. Of course, we do have currently playing Tyson Jost is going to be a UFA, and so too is Jack Roslovic, and also, of course, Eric Robinson. Are the Canes locked to these guys? Do they feel they're going to stay? That's an interesting question. And we look at an area that we've talked a lot about, which remains an acute concern for the Hurricanes, and that's center ice. They just can't seem to get it nailed, in my view. We know they need a 2C. That's not going to happen, I don't think, at this stage. We might be surprised, as is possible with Eric, but I think they're more likely going to look for someone that can shore up that 4C. And one of the key things that we know in playoff action, and we saw it certainly with Tampa and Spades and also with the Panthers last year, these teams have solid fourth lines. So if you're going to go deep, you've got to have four lines you can roll. And right now, the Canes don't. And they definitely need to strengthen the fourth line. So if we look at the center ice spot, which has been a sore spot and a big area of concern, what's out there? Anything?
The one name that I've seen traveling around a little bit, not necessarily in Kane circles, but elsewhere, is Sissons out of Nashville.
Colton Sissons, yes.
He has. He's not a UFA at the end of this season. It's another season. So that would be if the Canes want to have somebody that would work in their depth going forward beyond just this year.
Right.
The nice thing about Colton Sissons is that he's very flexible in where he plays. He can play center. He is a right shot, so it gives them that opportunity, but he has played wing as well. So, for example, if they were to keep Roslovic or Jost, who are also both capable of playing center, they can each take turns, or you can decide which one suits best depending on the situation, the face-off dot, that sort of thing. He's not going to wow anybody with his offense. He's not that kind of person unless he's playing the Colorado Avalanche. I think half of the goals that he has scored this year have come against the Avs.
I think I noticed that. He seemed to score almost every time we see the highlights in Colorado.
Yeah, so that's just a weird little extra detail in my head. But he is decent at faceoffs. I think he's 55% this season, so that would make him fit the Rod Brindamore style, that sort of thing as well. So, I mean, nice, solid, hold the fort kind of guy who would, again, work really well either as a 4C or a 12th or 13th forward, just depending on who's healthy and what role they need him to play.
Yeah, and Sissons, his current deal is 2.85, so that's a very friendly deal. That's nice for another year. He's a good size. He checks in over 6 feet, and I think he's about 200 pounds exactly, 6'1" and 200. So he's a guy that fits the mold. Here's an interesting thing from Hockey Forecaster on Sissons. I thought it really told the story and why I think he might be in the radar of the Canes. He continues to fashion an NHL career out of a supreme work ethic, excellent intensity, and a dash of skill. He's a good defensive forward who wins more than his share of faceoffs. He can play anywhere up front and has the grit to make a pest out of himself. That's a guy that fits RBA's system to a T. And I watched him a lot. He's had a couple of 15-goal years, so I mean, the guy can put the odd, goal in and so on. And I like him a lot. I think he's a good choice as well from you, Katie, on that one. Another person I wanted to talk to was J.G. Pageau. Now, J.G. Pageau is someone I'm really excited about, and he's a little bit more money, and it might be a little bit more complex trade. He's at $5 million to 25-26. But Pageau is a pest. He's a hardworking guy. He's one of the best face-off guys in the league. He's at 60% right now. And he's, again, a guy that you read this from Hockey Forecaster. He began his career as more of a checker and penalty killer than a scorer, but has developed his offensive skills as he's matured. He plays way bigger than his 5'10" frame. So he's a guy, if you watch them, he's out there, he's a pest, he's doing something. What do you think about a guy like maybe J.G. Pageau and the Canes?
Well, I'm going to quote the famous thing that everyone says when they talk about any player from the Islanders: is J.G. Pageau actually going to be available? Only God and Lou Lamoriello know.
Of course, you don't know that for sure. Yeah.
Lou keeps his cards very close to his vest. He does not let anybody know what he's thinking about doing. Yeah, and more often than not, the Islanders fans have been surprised to find out that nobody got traded. When they were sure that they were going to. So we don't really know. And that I think, in addition to the complexity of the money and everything else, would probably be something that would hold the Canes back a little bit, because that's going to be a lot of money for them
for sure
to fit in under the cap. But also, if Pageau's available, there will be a lot of people throwing offers at the Islanders, and the Canes typically don't get into bidding wars for these types of players, especially in this year when we've already talked about how they're looking for mostly depth. I think Sissons fits the bill better than Pageau in that sense. So I don't see that being something that could realistically happen. I mean, it's possible, but there again, the other complaint that people have about the Canes is that they have too many small forwards already.
Well, that's true. I mean, for sure.
And that is something that you have to think about in the playoffs, because no matter how skilled you are, I know it's something that we've seen with our own smaller forwards, that some of the best players on the team can get overwhelmed in that environment. So I know Peugeot doesn't. He's been through the playoffs plenty of times. He makes an impact, but the Islanders also haven't gotten very deep into the playoffs in recent years. So
Yeah, and I mean the
something
guy
else to
that
have
you
to look
really
at.
want out of there would be, of course, Brock Nelson. But I
Different kind of
wasn't
trade.
I
Then we're
wasn't going to
talking,
swing
yeah.
for the fences at this stage. I sort of agree with you. I do love Pajot, though. I think he's a great player. Would be an ideal fourth line centerman, and I particularly like the fact he's a right shot and very significantly capable in the faceoff dot. But
Mm.
okay, so to your point, getting someone a little bit bigger, and we've talked about him a few times, as Nick Bukestad with Utah. I'm not sure, and we don't know what the situation is with Utah as well. If players are going to be available, we do know there's some names kind of floating around, whether or not they are. Bukestad's an interesting one. He's 6'5", he's 205 pounds. If you watch him, he's huge.
Hmm.
But he's a guy that last year, I mean, he had 22 goals, 23 assists. He had an excellent year last year, a bounce back year. He had some years where he was really injured quite a bit, some serious injuries. And he kind of bounced back. But the thing about Bukestad that I like, again, he's got a very friendly contract, 2.1. He's a UFA. That's all working beautifully. He's a guy that can play up and down your lineup, though. He with Utah, he played quite a bit with Clayton Keller and Nick Schmaltz. So he was right up on the top line. And then, of course, next thing you saw him, he was down in the fourth line. So he's a guy that can go up and down the lineup. And he's not going to hurt you defensively. He's very solid. He's good in the faceoff dot as well. What do you think about a guy like Nick Bukestad?
I don't know that I buy into that reputation as much. A lot of what I've read actually says that he's questionable defensively and struggles in the faceoff dot, and that he just hasn't quite figured out how to play to his size yet. And I think that's part of why you see the, sometimes up, sometimes down the lineup. That it's either on or it's off, and it's not quite figured out. But that could end up being a good thing for the Canes as far as getting him, because if there's one place to help him play to those strengths and really get to that side of his game, I can't imagine a better coach for that than Rod Brindamore. So there's a potential there that could work out. That's nice. And as you said, that size is something that definitely would come in handy, since we have we have some big guys on our team, but we also have some smaller guys. Yeah. So having that extra muscle and physical presence on the ice definitely would be a benefit.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. I mean, we've definitely been trying to focus in on right shot centers. There's one more that his name is out there a lot, and this is coming to you, Erin, of course, and that's Jake Evans.
Yeah, I like Jake Evans, and I think that when you're talking about a Rod Brindamore fit in terms of the player, Jake is very defensively responsible, has been forever. Very good in the face-off circle. Somebody that does play up and down the lineup. He has had to, because the Montreal Canadiens have had many, many setbacks with their centers. In fact, the most recent news is that the young centerman Kirby Dach, who has been playing as their second line center, is now injured again for the remainder of the season. So that's another blow for them to have to deal with. So Evans has had lots more ice time than your typical fourth line center. And he's not a disaster or a liability. He's actually an asset in those when he has to move up and down the lineup. He's very much like the Montreal Canadiens version of Jack Drury that we had with the Canes for so long. So I think that in many ways he would be a good fit. He's a little bit smaller. He's on the 6 foot side, right at 6 feet. But he's very deadly on the penalty kill. He's scored a number of shorthanded goals this year, and a number of shorthanded points, especially assisting on shorthanded goals on the breakaways. So. That's an asset that he brings to the team. He's having a career year in scoring, and that's mostly bolstered by a highly unsustainable shooting percentages in combination with the ice time and the extra opportunities he's gotten. But the only thing that's a big drawback to me is I think that the Canes. Well, there's two things. First of all, he's going to be highly sought after, which again, this is another player that when you're on the top of the list and everybody wants you to come to your team, that's not the players the Canes usually go for, because nearly always someone will end up overpaying. I know that the Habs are reportedly asking for a lot for Evans. They would honestly prefer to package him with Yoel Armia. So if they do that, then that's going to be a big package as far as what they expect back. And the other thing is that Evans's agent has kind of let it known that they want a pretty sizable extension. So if this is not a player that he's not your typical depth defenseman that
Right.
you're just going to take for the playoffs and then let go. If the Canes actually wanted him, they would want to sign him for a longer term.
Sure.
But if the money that I'm hearing is anywhere near close to what he's actually asking for, I think the Canes will keep looking. So that's just my feelings. And I love the kid as a player. He's a great player. For his role, he's always been just gritty, determined, and has worked hard for every inch of ice he's ever had. So that part of his game would fit the Canes, very, very well. But I think that he's going to have a lot of suitors, and he's going to probably go to someone who's willing to overpay just to get a center of his type. So,
well, what I've seen has been a second round pick, generally thrown around for Evans.
I think that's kind of in the vicinity, but then I think there's some indication that they may actually even be looking for a little bit added on from.
Yeah. Again, as you say,
depending on how who else goes with him and how else they structure things.
It depends on who wants him. I mean, the thing about Evans that I've noticed this year is he certainly is more confident. He seems to be doing much better with the puck. Obviously, it's showing in his stats as well. He's always been a hard worker, a good penalty killer. One of those guys you put him over the boards and he's getting it done. He is like Jack Drury. I mean, he's very much like Jack Drury.
Very much in that mold.
And I think that would be an attraction to the Hurricanes because I think, frankly, I think they miss Jack Drury right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Katie says we can't have him back.
Nope.
Well,
he's been just fine.
That's the frustration, right? I mean, it's interesting because, of course, Jack was great in the faceoff dot, and he scored the odd goal or set one up once in a while. So he was a guy that could really help. But I think if you kind of zero in on, are they going to try to get a right shot center? There's not a lot out there. That's the challenge. Mm-hmm. When you take a look at who's going to be available, there's not a lot of them out there. And the names that we're talking about are amongst the few that are out there. So if the Canes are deciding to do something, it could very well be one of these folks that we've been talking about. I wouldn't be surprised. But it's going to be tough because other teams are pushing too, because there's more teams that are going to be trying to strengthen at the deadline. And there's fewer teams that have players available. So the cost will be a little bit higher. But I think the Canes have been talking about this for a long time, trying to shore up that center spot. And they do want a right shot centerman that can help them in the faceoff. Mm-hmm. So we'll keep an eye on that one. There hasn't been as much discussion on this, but I do believe strongly the Canes will keep an eye open for a possible move on the wing as well. And there are some players that kind of fit that, again, low cost, going to be UFAs type thing. I think for the most part, those are the players that they're probably going to look at. But there are some names out there, and you mentioned one of them, Joel Armia, with Montreal. Erin is a guy that he's got a $3.4 million deal. He's a UFA this year. I thought he looked good in the Four Nations face-off. He's a guy that's seems to up his game when the playoffs come. Good-sized player, skates well. What can you tell us about Joel?
Well, Armia is one of those players that, I think a lot of people underrate him in the regular season because he just goes quietly about his business and does his job. And, he's had ups and downs in that area. In fact, he had kind of a big setback last year. He went down to the AHL for a little bit because he just wasn't doing the job. And so for him to do that and clear waivers and everything else and still come back and be the player that he is right now, I think he just needed to have kind of a reset of what his role was and what his expectations were. He was just going through some stuff, and now he's back to being the steady, dependable player that he's always been. That bottom six winger with a big physical profile. He's a big guy. Armia is, and he's he just gets it done, and he's one of the best. To me, one of the best defensive-minded wingers on the team in Montreal. I think that Brind'Amour would love his defensive game. I really do believe that. He is, like you said, he's a playoff person who elevates their game in the playoffs and in tournaments. He is known for his ability to exceed expectations in those situations. You put him on out there on the third or fourth line in the regular season, and he's going to work hard. He's going to forecheck hard. He's going to do all those things right. But in the playoffs, there's this extra little edge where, you know, those goals actually go in and he
Right.
scores. And so there's that little elevated, you know, scoring effect. So I like him as a player. I think he'd be a really good fit for the Canes. I don't know if they would be able to get him again because Montreal is not sure yet who they're moving or if they're making, you know, if they're selling at all, you know. I think realistically, they probably are coming to that decision. The Habs are playing the Sabres for a back-to-back again tonight. They're within a game or two of needing to make that determination. Are we selling or not? You know, I think that they have certainly worked hard to try to get into a wild card spot this year, like all these other teams in the East.
There's a bunch of them.
So they don't want to. I think that my feeling is that management doesn't want to preemptively start selling off guys that have been there all this time and that are such a connection with the young kids. They will do it if they need to, but they're going to wait. I think it'll be Friday, and so we'll see if the Canes are going to hang around and wait for something like that or if they're going to make a move sooner than that. But I'd love to see Armia in Carolina. I think he'd be a good fit.
Oh, he'd be a nice add to that fourth line for sure. And I think he could even play with the dads. Quite nice.
Oh, well. He could easily be a third line winger. He could take William Carrier's spot and that's, you know, just before we go on to talk about the other wingers, that is one thing we don't really know. If the Canes feel like there's a good chance that Carrier will be back for the playoffs, I don't think they pick up a winger at all. So that's another thing that could affect this decision-making process.
You're absolutely right, but we have not heard anything that gives us any kind of comfort he's coming back. I think he's gone.
No.
And you know what? The interesting thing is, and this has worked well and is going to work well in the favor of the Panthers, is how often have teams put these folks on LTIR and they show up just at the start of playoffs? And the Panthers are going to do that with Matthew Tkachuk, and they're going to be in a situation to load up. They're going to load up. And you know who's done this? Vegas has done this virtually every year. They put Mark Stone on, and they get 6 or 7 additional million and go and get a guy like, whoever. Okay, so I agree with you. I mean, I'd love to see Armia. I do think any of these players are possible. I don't think they're out of the realm of possibility. I believe that Eric's going to be out there trying to strengthen the team, and that's what he's always talking about, is making the team better. And I think there are some areas that need improved. Now, a guy that I have talked about, and I know you're not as keen on him, Katie, is of course Ryan Donato. Donato is getting a lot of attention, and I've been reading a ton about Donato lately. Some of it great, some of it not so great, but he's a guy that definitely is playing extremely well this year. He's got 21 goals, 22 assists on Chicago. That's an insane number. And by the way, 18 of his 21 goals are 5-on-5. And I think that's quite a story. He is playing the wing, so I would not consider him a center iceman. I think he's a guy that, again, he's got a very friendly contract, $2 million. He's a UFA. I wouldn't be unhappy to see Ryan Donato join the Canes.
Oh, well, I would have to disagree with you.
I know you do.
To start with, he's really not a good skater. And he's not a playmaker. He's not really physical presence. He's just kind of there. And the only reason that he's had success this year is because Chicago's not been very good and he has an above average shooting percentage.
Yeah.
So you take him off of a Chicago team where he's getting a whole lot of minutes because of the reality of the situation they're in, and you put him on the Hurricanes with, he's going to see he's going to see his ice time really reduced in a role with the Canes. Yes. And he's not going to be playing with as good of a player, even on Chicago's limited lineup. So the reduction in ice time, the fact that he'd be fourth line type players, that sort of thing. I don't see him being effective with the Canes and the Canes system for all of those reasons listed. He's just so middle of the road and doesn't really excel in anything. And the Canes need somebody who will be a little bit more present than that and not be a liability.
I mean, the only reason I look at a guy like Donato, sure, and this is kind of an outlier for him too as well. Um, I am not particularly comfortable with the Canes scoring these days. I think the
Mm-hmm.
Canes are light. Their goals are way off, and frankly, if they don't shore up scoring somehow, some way, I don't feel particularly good about that. I mean,
It's not
we can add another lunch pail guy. That's fine, but frankly, I think goal scoring is a problem.
not going to come from Donato, though, for all the reasons I just mentioned. His reduced ice time, his shooting percentage has to come back down to earth. I think he'll get on the Canes and he'll have just as many struggles as everyone else. He's not going to move the needle as far as putting pucks in the back of the net. No way. No way.
Well, okay, that's fair enough, and I'm not sure if he can help or not, but I'm definitely interested in getting a goal scorer, and of course the big fish out there would be Ricard Raquel. Raquel, of course, with Pittsburgh, he's a guy that again it's going to be a little bit more of a deal. He's got $5 million till 27, 28. He's been rumored to be in discussion with the Canes on some sites I've been checking out that they've been looking at him. He's a guy that to me would be a nice addition on the top six, which would give you some flexibility. I'm not sure how a deal could get done, but they've done deals with the Pens before using prospects and draft picks, so that I think again, one of the things we haven't talked about is the Canes are so flush with prospects. Mm-hmm. They have got extra prospects, and they're not doing anything with them. Frankly, some of these deals that they should be looking at should be prospect based, because they're not going to be able to bring all these people up. It's just not going to happen. So, we haven't really factored that in. We've kind of been looking at, a later round draft pick or, somebody that we don't think about or whatever. But there are some deals like, I'm sure Pittsburgh and some of the other teams would be happy to pick up, some of our B prospects. And just as we did with Ville Koivunen and Ponomarev to the Penguins. So so a guy like Ricard Raquel would be an interesting one. Another guy that I've thought about, have mentioned a few times, is Lawson Crouse with Utah. Lawson Crouse, again, he's on a deal till 26, 27. So looking at a deal that Eric would like, something that is not just this year, but maybe, bring a couple more years on it. Crouse is a big guy. He's a player that, again, has had some success. He had 3 20-goal years in a row. This year, he's way off. So maybe there's, Utah's still in the mix, so we don't know if they're going to have anyone available. But if they decided to offer up a player like Crouse, what do you think about a guy like Lawson Crouse?
I don't know a lot about him. I have seen him when various my teams have played Utah. I think that Utah in general, their players have a very nice physical touch and approach that I think that the Canes could certainly need. Right. And I imagine that Crouse would be one of those guys. Again, though, like you said, it's just not knowing the availability, and then he is a little bit more money. He's not a depth person, so I think that the biggest thing that's going to come down is, as we look at these different areas, we look at defense and we look at center ice and we look at a possible winger to step in. I think that of those three positions, the winger position is actually, to me, the one that they're most likely to either spend very little or just not even add. Yeah. Because one of the things that was said when Carrier went down with injury was he can't be replaced. He's not replaceable. I think it was both. It was either Tulsky and Brind'Amour who said that, or just Tulsky. But they both kind of repeated that message that they're not looking to bring someone in to replace Will Carrier. They signed him to this lengthy deal, this very unusual deal, for a reason. So to me, when I look at both Raquel and Crouse, I'm looking at it and saying I don't see the Canes looking to make that kind of a move. Unless, like, for instance, if they were to trade a winger away, and that would be the person we've talked about would be Jack Roslovic.
Exactly. I would expect he would be part of that deal. Yeah.
Then you're not talking about a fourth-line player, though. So then you still might need a fourth-line player. No. So that's where I guess you just have to see what kind, how are they going to put all those pieces together? Because right now it's a puzzle. So you have to figure out how are they going to fit in their various deadline needs while still, staying within what they can do with the cap and everything else. So,
Well,
so
I think
if they're
you're
going to
onto
go
something.
for a move, yeah, if they're going to go for a move like Kraus or like Raquel, then I think they're going to be making a trade. So we'll
Yeah,
have to see what happens with that.
and I think you're onto something. I mean, one of the things I noticed, there was a period where it looked like Roslovic was actually adding some value recently, which, for a long time he's been on the fringe, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually looked like when he was up with Kokaniemi, there was a bit of
Mm-hmm.
uh, chemistry, and there were some things happening. But he was quickly put back onto that fourth line. And
Mm-hmm.
my feeling is, and I've said this kind of a number of times, I do not see Jack Roslovic as a fourth line player. I do not
No.
see that. I do not see Jack Roslovic as a center. So if you have Roslovic and he's really playing on the fourth line and he's not really the right player, he's a UFA. I keep thinking that he's going to be part of a deal. I know, I mean, it's easy to say that they don't really need to do much. They do need to do something. The Canes need to improve. In my view, they're not going deep if they don't improve. I just don't see it. I don't see it with the team they have right now. So I think Eric's probably sitting there feeling the same thing. He's loaded up with the big gun in Mikko Rantanen. He's gone and he's got Taylor Hall. I just can't see him sitting there saying, I think I'm happy with the crew we have. I mean, I'm struggling.
We haven't reached the we like our group moment yet.
Yeah, I'm struggling with that.
I'm waiting for them to say those words before I think that they're actually done.
Yeah, that's the Rod Brindamore. I love my crew.
No one has said we like our group yet this year. So I'm waiting to see, could we like them better? I think we could. So I agree with you on that sense. And as far as Roslovic goes, I mean, yeah, his line. I don't remember which game it was now. I don't have my notes in front of me, but one of the recent games when he was on that line with Kokaniemi and Robinson,
right,
for the nearly 5 minutes they played together at 5-on-5, they had a 100% Corsi 4 rating.
Yeah.
Now, you will see 100% Corsi 4 for a period, for a few shifts. You don't see that for an entire game, because that was the entire time that they played together at 5-on-5.
Yeah.
And that was crazy to see. So, yes, he clearly does better when he's not buried in a fourth line role, because that line was trying to generate offense, the three of them together. And so they were spending most of their time in the offensive zone, and that's why they had those puck possession and shot chance numbers. You put Roslovic on the fourth line, and it's a different role. That's not the role that the fourth line usually plays. So I don't see how that works either. I'm kind of in agreement with you there.
Well, and there's another challenge that I think we're seeing is that Jackson Blake is not going to be a fourth liner either. And Jackson is, I'm concerned for Jackson Blake in the playoffs, frankly. And we talked about his slight frame, and he gets pushed around an awful lot. And when this gets tough, and these teams are going to bulk up, they're going to add more defensemen. You know how it goes. That can get in there and really get in your face. I am concerned for what he's going to be able to do. And I think, having him and Roslovic as two of your right wingers, you're really exposing yourself a little bit. And that's where I think they've got to shore up. And I know it's not a must-have, but I think a smart move by Erin,
I agree with you,
would be to go get another forward that he can put out there. And that, and a guy that I like, another guy, he shoots right and he's a good player, and I'll mention him while we're on this, is Luke Cunnin with San Jose. Formerly with the Wild. You might have seen Luke quite a bit. He's a guy that, again, hardworking guy. He's in your face. He's a great penalty killer. He does a lot of different things. He's a solid player, though. He checks in at 6', 200 pounds. He's a guy that, you need that kind of player, right? He can skate. He can get out there. He can make something happen. And I think the Canes right now have some of these guys that they're on the fringe. I guess that's the best way to put it. They're on the fringe of the game. And playoff hockey is going to be so much harder. And that's my concern with our current lineup. And I hope Eric's going to address some of this, because otherwise I think we're going to find it's going to be a short playoff season this year.
There's definitely moves that need to be made. Mm-hmm.
Definitely. I mean, even look at someone like, we got Taylor Hall, and he has been spending a lot of time on the fourth line too. It's just about finding that chemistry and that fit and who works well together and that balance as well. If you remember in the playoffs, we started with Jarvis up with Aho and Gensel, and then eventually, because of the size mismatch, they moved Svech up there in order to try and balance that out a little bit. And so I'm sure they're going to be looking at that going in. We definitely will not see Jarvis and Blake on a line together come the playoffs. That will be too tiny. But, you talk about Blake and what the work he's put in and the success he's had. What if he was on a line with Svech and KK? Then he's got two big brothers to help look after him, and he can go and be the pesky little brother who, mucks it up in the corner and gets everybody riled up for the other two to finish off. So yeah, it's the sort of thing that the Canes are going to be looking at for not just the individual player, but how they match and mesh with the other players on the team, because we do have so many other good players. I mean, if you're looking at putting a Hall or a Blake on a fourth line, we really are very fortunate in the kind of depth that we have
absolutely
on our team. And the fact that we get to just tinker around the edges a bit is truly a blessing and a privilege this time of year, because I know a lot of other playoff teams have much deeper surgeries that they need to do to their rosters in order to feel good heading into the back end of the season and the playoffs.
Well, you know that one of the teams that we're going to have to deal with is going to be the Florida Panthers, likely. And the Panthers have just strengthened themselves significantly, I think, getting Seth Jones. So they're a team that's definitely trying. I know you don't care for him, but I think he's a solid defenseman. So again, a little bit of a disagreement on that. I think he's going to help them. I think he's going to help them in their system. I think he's going to be a nice add for them. And again, they're going to do more. You can expect, because they've got Kachuk going on the LTIR, they're going to do more. And that's the thing. The other thing you have to kind of look at is, and I know oftentimes they say we can't kind of be worried what other people do, but you do have to make sure that you're paying attention to it, because if these teams are continuing to strengthen and you're not, that gap becomes even more so. In any case, lots going to happen before Friday, I'm sure. I'm hoping. As we wrap up, ladies, I'd like to circle back and say, what are your hopes for the trade deadline, Katie?
I think my hopes are just that the Canes strengthen their identity both on and off the ice with whoever they acquire and whoever, if anybody they send off. They're moving in such a good direction right now. Rantanen and Hall are settling in. They're starting. They still got plenty of work to do, but they're starting to get their skates under them and be pushing in the right direction. It's easy to focus on the lack of offensive output, but if you look at the last few games that they had, these last three in particular, they were fantastic defensively. They didn't give up hardly. I mean, just a couple of goals each of those games, only one. Yeah. Kachekov, I mean, the empty netter doesn't count against the Oilers. They really have their identity back there starting to get fixed. And so as long as they could bring the forwards around and start scoring more than one or two goals in regulation, then they're going to put themselves in a great position. So as far as this trade deadline, I want them to be true to themselves. That's what I want. Be true to yourselves. Build on what you've already got. Trust in the vision that's been there this entire time. And I think that a really significant playoff push is possible. I'm tired of this. It's a transition year talk. No, the front office does not see it that way. Stop talking about it. They don't see it that way. And if Tulsi and Brindamore are not looking at this as a transition year, we need to stop looking at it and talking about it like it's a transition year. This is a year they are going for the cup. And they're going to go for the cup being true to who they are. And that's with Rantanen, that's with Hall, that's with whoever they bring in at the trade deadline.
I want to clap for you, Kate. That was excellent. I would only just add that there's one area I don't want them to be true to themselves, and that's the power play. Could we please take it out behind the woodshed, shoot it, and bring in a new one because it's not working. But yeah, that is where, when I'm in more serious vein, when I look at the, any deadline acquisitions, I think that the focus should be on players that can play to the Canes' identity, just like it always is. And, I don't see them getting somebody that's going to necessarily help them out on the power play, but, I liked seeing, talking about Rantanen, Katie, I liked seeing him sitting on the bench going over video clips with Aho after, some of the events of yesterday's game. Mm-hmm. I think that we all have said forever that they need a new power play coach and, or something to change how they're doing things. But when you have a player that is capable of sharing, his experience and skill and talent from a different system and just, who's been very good at this, who's a top player in the league, I think that will do more than anything when it comes to fixing that. But as far as going back to the deadline, my other thing that I want to hope for, I am not delusionally expecting Mikko Rantanen to sign before the deadline. We would all throw a huge party if he did. But I am looking forward to the clock striking, 3 p.m. Eastern on Friday. I am looking forward to the moment of disappointment that sweeps across the media when they realize that Mikko Rantanen is in fact still a Carolina Hurricane and will be so through the entire playoff season at the very least, because like you said, Katie, I'm tired of it. I'm tired of them. Some of the trade proposals that have been thrown out there have been so ridiculously insulting to who Rantanen is as a player. You don't take a player like Mikko Rantanen and trade him for a couple of guys that are kind of, no. But it feels like the media is generating a lot of this because, once again, the disrespect that the Carolina Hurricanes get. Oh, surely nobody wants to stay there. The Canes can't have a superstar. That's not fair. Because they're too good without one. And I think that's what underlies a lot of this narrative is the idea that, they don't like the fact that the Carolina Hurricanes have achieved as much as they have achieved under Rod Brind'Amour without having that star player, without having that, what, Sarah Sivian calls the oomph per 60 factor, It's like, no, now they have someone like that on top of everything else they have. And yeah, it's going to be scary for the rest of the league. So for sure. Let's get there.
Well, Katie, I'm shocked you didn't say my big hope for the deadline is that Mikko Rantanen signs a deal in advance. I was expecting that, but that's good enough. And to your point, Erin, just quickly, of course, Eric Tulsky will only pick up players that fit the Kane style. We know that that's his mantra. Mm-hmm. So I think anyone that joins the Hurricanes will be RBA type players. And will be folks that can pick up the Kane system pretty quickly. But in any case, 3 o'clock Friday, we're going to know what has happened, if Mikko has signed or if other deals have happened. And we're going to be excited about that. And we're going to try to get together very quickly after that to review what's happening with the Canes and what kind of moves they've made. So, as always, spirited conversation. And some good discussion on a number of players, some needs of the Canes, our thoughts on where the Canes go. Clearly, we feel strongly a depth defenseman would be great. Another centerman would be great as well. So we'll keep an eye on that. Ladies, as always, it's a riot. We had a great time. And look forward to another episode very, very soon with you as well. For those of you who've been watching or listening, as always, we really appreciate it. If you like this episode, hit the like button. If you want to be alerted of future episodes of Storm Tracker, please press subscribe and the bell, and of course, you'll be made aware of them. And finally, if you have any comments or questions for Katie, Erin, or myself, please leave those down below, and we'll get back with you just as quickly as possible. As always, thanks a lot for joining us. We'll catch up real soon right here on Storm Tracker.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends for everything with the Canes. You need Storm Tracker.